the road between the gut feeling that you have when you first respond to a piece, when you first discover it, when you first read the score, or when you first listen to something, the route between that particular feeling that you have and the sound that you then have in your mind in the way that you want to produce it, how you want to play the piece, becomes in a way more straightforward. Because at that point, it's sort of like the more questioning you do, the more the real you comes out. Because now you're now directly involved in the interpretation, let's say, of a piece of music.
Hi, Kerson.
Very nice to meet you.
It's so lovely to meet you here on Zoom. And it's early morning for you in Canada.
It is. It's sort of late morning. But it's nice. The weather's nice, so it's a good excuse to be up early.
That's wonderful. But you've been quite busy over the summer.
Yes, I've been. It's been quite a nice, busy summer, and yet actually some time also in between things to relax as well, for little pockets here and there. Since busy, but at the same time not sort of spending at least a little bit more time in one place, so that I'm not moving around as much. For example, I was in a festival in Quebec called the Monde for 2 weeks. And that was where I taught, but also played. So I was able to stay there for 2 weeks and sort of have a little bit of downtime as well. And then I was in Italy for also a period of time, teaching at Mahler Academy, playing with Mahler Academy Orchestra, and then also doing a few concerts. So, it was sort of, busy, and yet at the same time, sort of a little easier on the travel front.
Oh, yeah. Because you go all over the world, you travel all over the world, so that must also be a bit tricky to get some rest and also, spend a bit of downtime.
Yeah, it's a constant sort of balance, I guess. You get to travel to places, and for that, for sure, one would be very thankful for that. But at the same time, it's not like sort of like, oh, getting the time to see the sights, so it's like you're there, but at the same time, it's sort of like a constant balance between work and play in a way. But at the same time, you do try, and especially these days, as I've gotten, as time has went on, I think just like realizing the importance of that as well, like having the downtime and having time to recharge and to rest and all that, I think that's equally important. So, yeah.
But do you talk about the teaching? Do you enjoy teaching?
I do enjoy teaching. I think teaching is it's a really valuable. Well, first of all, I do feel it's nice to interact with, let's say, the new generation. Also the fact that I'm also part of could say that I'm part of the new generation, but in a sense, it's sort of like passing knowledge on or exchanging, or at least interacting with young people is something always very fulfilling, something that I need. But at the same time, it's, teaching is always interesting because, of course, I could talk about, violin, anything to do with violin playing and using it, let's say, as a means to get to the end. I could talk about that all the time, but in a sense, it's just also like if you teach, things also come back to you as well. Like just to be able to, for example, be able to articulate or find a way to articulate in words what is usually not really, you don't really need to say, sort of, or what's abstract, I guess, inside things that you yourself look for. But at the same time, you never actually really have to explain. I think to actually be able to explain that is actually it's a really interesting thing. And somehow I think that knowledge comes back to you and also enriches you at the same time as, let's say, the knowledge is being passed, or that the views are being exchanged. So I think that's really fulfilling. Yeah.
You're not the first musician to tell that, or artist to say that the teaching actually is so rewarding, and that it's almost as that you have to rethink a little bit, things that you did automatically, you have to rethink to explain it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's actually, the more I do it, the more I think that it's actually essential to do that in order to, let's say, to have a completely well-rounded mindset, but approach even, like just to be able to see things from different angles, let's say, and to be able to, let's say, reverse engineer or break down, let's say, certain things, technique, but also, let's say, it could be anything. But I think that's just incredibly important. It's just an important tool in a way to be able to see things from many different angles. Yeah.
But now, at what age did you start playing the violin?
I started when I was 4.5.
Wow. Yeah. And did you come from a musical family? What was the inspiration behind the violin? Why did you choose the violin?
Well, I think in the beginning, I wanted to be a double bassist.
Really?
Yeah, I think that was my first.
What a big contrast.
Yeah, going big, from the very beginning, pretty much. I think there was something about, I don't know, the presence of it maybe. And then, of course, I think my parents, didn't really want to. They said probably they wanted to. Well, they would have had to buy a new van or a new car or something, or buy a space shuttle or something, right? To transport such an instrument. So I think they thought, let's maybe a mini one.
Let's get him something he can carry himself.
Yeah, exactly. Or like a mini double bassist, which in time will grow, but it never did. Yeah. So but yeah, no, I think it was also something to do with I guess I had a natural affinity with the violin from the get-go, very, very fast in a way, because there's something very physical. There's something physical about the instrument. Like, it's something a little bit more vigorous, let's say, than sitting at the piano and learning the keyboard. There's something already. The arms are in full motion. You're doing something that feels physical. And I think for a kid who is relatively active and sort of rambunctious at times, I think that was a good use of energy, maybe.
Well, that's interesting that you say that, because when my daughter was young, she played the piano, but she was never very motivated. And then the piano teacher said to me, she needs something where there's more movement. And then I had her play the violin, and she actually loved that. So it's interesting that you say that about the movement.
Yeah, I think it's, there's something, I guess, the feeling as if you're just doing activity in a way. I think that's, for kids, I would say, something that could determine whether or not you enjoy an activity, because, I mean, of course, it would be very, very natural that, you would enjoy doing sports, or you would enjoy at least moving around or doing recess or whatever, so I think I think that was a part to play. Although I think also in time, I think I really did really identify with the way the violin works, like the fact that you can actually sing on the violin, or that there was something about the approach that kind of agreed with me. Yeah.
But now, how soon did you know that you wanted to be a professional musician?
That's a good one, since actually that was rather, funnily enough, it was actually much later. Of course, I mean, I was doing violin rather seriously throughout my childhood years, and doing competitions already. And at 13, then I went to the Menuhin competition, and that was a big eye-opening moment, let's say. But in a way, it was like during the whole that time, I was still thinking, because I was still in regular school at that time, and I was thinking to myself, like, I'll keep my options open. So violin, in a way, was, of course, a major, major thing, perhaps the major thing in my life, but at the same time, not the only thing. At least that was the mindset. But then I think at a certain point, when I was around 16, 17, maybe even 18, like during that time, I think I went through a real mental evolution, I guess, because suddenly it was sort of like, music making feels, or has become, personal in a way. It's not just something that you do because you do it for the sake of, or because you're good at it or whatever, as you did feel, let's say, when you were a kid, when you were much younger. You don't really consider these things when you're younger, but then I think at a certain point it just became personal, and it was a great way to encapsulate or to process, let's say, the experiences that I would have had up to that point, just human experience in general, and that kind of created, I guess, an essential need for me to do it. And so I think at that point, I was telling myself, yeah, perhaps this to be a violinist. I mean, that doesn't sound like let's give it a shot,
Yeah.
And so it happened rather later. Actually.
But you talk about the competitions that you won when you were younger. Do you think that also for children playing instruments, that's important to do that? Is that more? Is that encouraging? I mean, did that motivate you more to, say, for instance, practice and play?
Well, I think it's a very individual question in a way, because I think it depends on the individual. I think for me, I think doing those competitions when I was young, it was, in my mind, I think it was an excuse just to kind of go to a social gathering.
Oh, I see.
It's like
Okay.
when you go to those music competitions, let's say the annual ones, that once a year you're going to meet up with friends or with other families that you enjoy and sort of go through an experience together. I was never someone who really enjoyed practicing, I was always someone who that you would always have to try and encourage to practice, because I'd rather be doing something else or kind of thing, so perhaps those competitions provided a little bit of external structure for me to follow, so that that I would actually at least come to work on the violin, at least sort of regularly in a regular schedule, what works, right? I guess in that case. But I think it also, I guess, really depends on the mindset with which you go into a competition, because that's where I think there's a lot of paradox somehow. Music is not a thing built for competitions. It's not a competition aim, but at the same time, there are music competitions, and therefore it's very tempting to think in that way, to think that, oh, I enter and therefore I must win, or therefore that I am the best, or that I want to be the best. But I think it's more, if one is able to think of competition, let's say, as a meaningful way of exposure, and as, let's say, a marker for personal development. So let's say as a goal that you make for yourself, without looking to your side, for example, without looking at other people. I think that can be really where competitions can be useful, especially at a young age. But otherwise, I think that you can see sort of how, let's say, how easily it can be unhealthy in that sense. It just depends on the mindset, I think. But if one is able to cultivate that mindset, and that depends also on the people around you, that surround you, your support system, your parents, your teacher, your friends, your people who are around you, let's say, who are willing to support you and push you in the right direction. I think it all depends on just having a healthy situation that way to begin with. Yeah.
I spoke to a painter this week, and we talked about this whole thing, and it's so interesting that you mentioned this as well, that competition, that we should not always see it as being envious of somebody or thinking somebody is better, but that actually is you should see it as a way of encouragement. If you can look at somebody and think that, hey, this is almost like a bit of an encouragement for you to do that maybe better than you did before. So if you see also the competitions, that you shouldn't judge yourself so harshly, then if you don't win, then it's actually then beneficial.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that in that case, the competition results are there, but at the same time, they're not as important as, let's say, like the changed person that you are at the end, or let's say the renewed outlook that you might have on yourself, but also on your music making at the end. I think that's much more valuable somehow. And it's true. It's sort of like, if I find that, I think it would be natural, let's say, if you focus on the idea of competition, that you would focus on, let's say, the more, because in the end, music is not quantified. It's not something quantifiable. It's not like measuring something in sports, or, objectively you can measure something in sports. Music can't do that, but at the same time, I could imagine that it would encourage someone, let's say, to look at technique and to at least focus on let's say, just the cleanliness and the perfection, the so-called perfection of technique. But at the same time, the funny thing is, in my experience, like, it actually, the way things trickle down is actually the opposite. In a way, it all comes from, ideally, I would assume, just like, the vision or the conviction, musical conviction that you first have, and, imagining the kind of sound that you want to produce, or imagining the kind of music that you want to make. And then you find the solution. That, having that as a priority immediately encourages the right kind of progress in technique, rather than, let's say, working technique as a general thing first and then dealing with the music later. I feel like that's actually, counterproductive in a way when it comes to being a musician, and in the end, I think that's what people are listening for. Even if, let's say, people are listening with a slightly more critical, critical ear, as one naturally would, let's say, in a competition setting. But at the same time, I think at all times, that's what people are looking for, is to be touched, is the goosebumps moments, those are what is currency in our profession, in our art. It's not to say who can play the fastest, the cleanest, the most consistent. That is honestly quite boring, to be honest, because in a way it's achievable. That's achievable just by, you see so many cases of it today. Like, it's easy to get to that kind of standard through just consistent hard work. But when it comes to, let's say, having something to say, something individual to say, something that comes really from a very deep place within, somewhere very personal, and being able to express that through the means of your technique, that, I think, is something that the people, I think, audience members will remember those instances and will continue to want to pay for those kinds of instances as well. That's the real currency.
But how much pressure do you have as say you're a student or you're studying music, and of course then there's a lot of emphasis on the technique, and there are all these music or the regulations or the things. How easy is it for you then to develop your own style? So, because you are very, when I watch you play, when I hear you, you are very much your own artist. You have your own style and your own way of expressing. But somewhere, where did you get to the confidence of being yourself?
Yeah, in a way, I think it all stems from maybe starting to question everything. Mm-hmm. Because, of course, I mean, it's very natural that we would start, let's say, playing violin, learning from a particular method or from a particular tradition, or at least having, let's say, particular sounds in the ear already, let's say, growing up. And that's great, because anyway, we need to start from somewhere. But at the same time, I think it's equally valuable at a certain point to start to have the courage to unlearn, and to start to question everything. I think actually, and that happens, I guess, more, let's say, when you encounter differing viewpoints, or when you encounter, let's say, viewpoints that are different from the one that you currently have. And I think that's always helpful. That's always beneficial, in the sense that causes you to then reevaluate your own viewpoints. Even something as specific as, like, even the way you produce sound, or the sound that you produce, or particular specific ideas about the music itself, or a particular piece, let's say, that you're able to let's say, not to settle on something, but to continually reevaluate and to continually question something to the point where, like, okay, that process, you continually do it. I think that over time you do develop, let's say, the confidence or the conviction to follow your own ideas or to actually make musical decisions for yourself. I think without that spirit of constantly re-examining and questioning for yourself, that nobody does that for you, but you do it yourself. I think that really does lead in that particular direction. And for me, I think once I developed the confidence to do that, then it was very easy to start to actually imagine sound exactly how I would want to produce it. Or, imagine, let's say, or even like the road between the gut feeling that you have when you first respond to a piece, when you first discover it, when you first read the score, or when you first listen to something, the route between that particular feeling that you have and the sound that you then have in your mind in the way that you want to produce it, how you want to play the piece, becomes in a way more straightforward. Because at that point, it's sort of like the more questioning you do, the more the real you comes out. Because now you're now directly involved in the interpretation, let's say, of a piece of music. So I think that I think that the general idea is not to be complacent. That's like whether in music making or whether in daily life, it's part of that, I guess. It's never to sit on your laurels, so to say, never to sort of like to say, oh, okay, I'm comfortable doing this, I'm comfortable with this. Yeah, but in a spirit of also like in continual development, that it is part of that in the sense that you always look for something that, let's say, will continue to exercise or to test what you know. So in that sense, it's I think not to be complacent and to be constantly searching and to be constantly questioning. I feel like that's how, at least for me, how it came about. But in a sense, it's also like you don't go into it with the let's say the desire to be individual for the sake of being individual. You just basically, at a certain point, it's like you do things how you think things should be done, as simply as that. And I think that when you get to that state, backed up, let's say, by a lot of experimentation, a lot of thinking, a lot of rethinking, all that stuff, then I think that then it really comes from a place of authenticity, I find. Because I think if you go into it just wanting to sound different from anyone else, I think that's immediately something that's a superficial aim.
Yeah.
That, let's say, you haven't, let's say, gone through the full circle of rethinking, of reinventing, of questioning, and all that stuff, which is really necessary, I think, to find oneself truly. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Would you say you're a little bit of a rebel?
I would say not all the time, but okay. I would say I'm someone who has always been comfortable, let's say, being on a different path or on being, let's say, on an individual path, regardless of whoever else is on that path, whether there's no one, whether there's some people, whether there's everyone. Like, that was something that I was rather comfortable with. So even, let's say, if I was going at something alone, or if I was doing something, as long as true to myself, or something that I really believed in, then I didn't mind, let's say, being alone doing something. So in that sense, I mean, I felt like I was always free to do what I wanted to do, in the sense that I wasn't urged. I didn't feel the urge to follow the trend, or to let's say, to be part of a group, let's say. Yeah.
That's wonderful that you had the confidence to do that. But did you, when you were younger, did you play in an orchestra as well, or did you always play solo?
Yeah, so in a way, I mean, when I was young, I did a few, kind of a few different facets or a few different roles. In a way, I would go to also orchestra camp when I was younger, chamber music and all of that. I think like in the end, it's like when you play with people, whether it's orchestra or chamber music, that's actually a real way to learn about life and about human relations. You know, it's sort of like human relations condensed into a specific circumstance. But through, let's say, chamber music especially, I think just you learn to communicate with people, and you learn to make compromise, which is what you do when you're dealing with people, and it really teaches you about that aspect of life. And I think that orchestra playing, whether it's orchestra playing or whether it's even playing solo with orchestra, it's all an extension of that. So in a way, like, and there'll be some times, let's say, that I would nowadays, even let's say after the concerto, after going on stage for the concerto, that I would sort of discreetly put myself at the back of the second or first violins for the symphony. Sometimes I would do that in the orchestra, and I really, really enjoy it every single time. I think there's something about, as much as I'm happy, let's say, with the previous point, as much as I was happy, let's say, going at things alone, or there's something also really, really gratifying about becoming part of like a whole, like one whole unified unit that's working towards the same goal, you know. And in that sense, I mean, I love the idea of being in orchestra, even of course if I'm mostly a soloist these days, but I just love the idea of being part of something and coming together with like-minded people somehow. That's great. Yeah.
This is so wonderful for me always to hear conductors also speaking about this and musicians speaking about the orchestra. There's something that sounds so magical about the orchestra, because like you say, there's this feeling of togetherness, of creating, of people coming together, different instruments, but playing and making sound, that it sounds such a great club to be in. Almost.
Yeah, no, it's just there's something quite because in a sense it's like, the kind of musical ends that you work towards in your individual practice room. Like you want to try and unfold a phrase, for example, like the best way that you can, and just imagine that times 50 or times 100. It's like everyone is most ideally would be giving their complete all towards one piece of music, and that just the kind of synergy that comes out of that kind of experience is just, I could imagine it's like one of the it's like when you're able to feel genuinely like one with the people around you or the people beside you. I think that would be an amazing feeling. Yeah.
But you've recently done a recording as well.
Yeah, so the most recent recording that I've put out is one that I did in pandemic time with Philharmonia Orchestra in London and Austrian conductor Patrick Hahn.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And we had a great time together. But it's a recording of Benjamin Britten's violin concerto and Max Bruch, the famous violin concerto, his famous violin concerto, and another piece also by Bruch called In Memoriam, which is not very well known at all. I mean, even among violinists. I mean, I didn't even know it before I discovered it, but Bruch, it's interesting in the sense that Bruch considered it his best work for violin and orchestra. Interesting in the sense that if you imagine like how popular his violin concerto is. So I think that was sort of a project when I discovered, first of all, Britten Concerto. That's one of those pieces. It's like a 20th century piece, wartime piece in a way, or sort of the premonitions of war, the Second World War, Spanish Civil War, things that were happening, and this in a way reflects the character of that. Is so visceral in the way that it reflects that kind of character, and of course in the circumstances that we found ourselves in during the pandemic, but even just currently, I think it's it speaks still so powerfully, and it's in a way is so relevant. and I felt the need to record that piece after a while, just discovering it, I was like, I got to record that piece. But then also the balancing it with something like Bruch, which beyond the fact that it's well known among violinists and well loved as among the most popular in the violin repertoire, but just the fact that it's so comforting as a piece, I thought that it would be the perfect juxtaposition with the Britain as well. So
Okay.
so that was the reasoning behind that.
Do you have a preference of composers the music that you enjoy playing?
The way I always answer this question is that, every period or even every composer brings out a different in me. I think I try not to have favorites, like from an interpreter's point of view, of someone who actually plays the music and actually wants to convey it most convincingly to an audience. I think it would be nice to treat everything equally with the same amount of respect and the same amount of effort. But I do have certain soft spots. I mean, I do have for Brahms. I've always had a soft spot for Brahms in particular from very young. I love going back to the roots, in a sense, to Bach. More and more, I feel like that's important to me. But at the same time, I also love like anything that has any sort of any let's say that's rooted in nostalgia or rooted in, let's say, like someone's roots, folk music even, or even, let's say, longing to go back to, let's say, childhood state, of things, or when, kind of music of Schumann, for example, a lot of it, or things like Bartók or Janáček or Szymanowski, Enescu, any of these things, where you do deal with actually like a direct expression, even if it's not like folk music itself, but it does deal with a lot of folk influence, and you do feel like it's music of the people, in the countryside, that's deeply rooted to country, that's deeply rooted to land. I think that kind of repertoire always fascinates me. But in general, honestly, I mean, as much as I would like to figure out sort of like, or not even like to, but just as much as I, for the sake of this question, like to, pick out something, it's kind of impossible at this point. It's like everything brings out something different. Like I love French music as well, and how that differs from the German aesthetic as well. I mean, that to me is always quite interesting. Mozart's always, that's something that I've come to enjoy increasingly as you get older, because in a way it's sort of like it speaks to the idea that simplicity is sort of infinite complexity in a way, and that the more, let's say, that you become more and more complex, the more you're able to appreciate something simple and jewel-like, let's say.
But this is what I thought about now when you answered, is also, can you see sort of how it evolved for you, in the sense that when you were younger, there were certain things that appealed to you more, and now you say like more and more you tend to be drawn to the music of Mozart, so that there's these stages of your life also that you can almost take this music on and appreciate it more.
Sure. I think it has a lot to do with also just the way you internalize music. I think it's very different from when you're young, from when you're old, or when you're older, because also your priorities when listening, like when you listen or when you perceive music, the way you do it or the way it goes inside is different in a sense. I find that when I was young, I wouldn't necessarily, let's say, have as internal, let's say, as a perception of music as, of course you would appreciate, let's say, the aesthetics of something, external aesthetics, or for example, something that is big, that is bombastic. Of course, as a kid, you would be drawn to that, and be drawn to the big concerti, and you'd be drawn to, of course, I mean, that stuff is great. But at the same time, I think as I've gotten older, I've come to appreciate things, let's say, of the more intimate, or even of the more simple sense, like in a sense that you do, like, less is more, in that sense. So chamber music has become even more valuable to me than when I was younger. But also dealing with, let's say, for example, music that let's say is a little bit more introverted, that goes rather inside to the heart. I find that, and to be able to, let's say, find this quality in any kind of music, slow movements of Mozart, regardless of the fact that, let's say, he wrote it when he was 19 years old. There's still so much youth in that music, and in a way, also the reason not to take those kind of pieces too seriously from a scholarly point of view, like just the attitude with which you approach it is light, but at the same time, you're still able to find, let's say, the moments of intimacy and the moments of real internal searching, let's say, in the more lyrical aspects, or and so that awareness, I think, has gotten bigger over time. Just that you're looking for, you're looking for, even in the simplest, even in the most intimate of music passages or music making settings, that you're able to build like this internal world around you, rather than appreciating just the big and the energetic and the. So I think that has changed. Yeah.
But do you also play music from composers, living composers, like contemporary composers?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it can be really fascinating. Just because, I mean, when you interact with a composer, they're living, and so it's actually a two-way street in a way.
Amazing.
And that's really fascinating in a sense that you do have a direct source of, you get to the direct source of inspiration, of course, because the composer is there, but at the same time also you get to exchange and you get to discuss ideas. And I think that's it sort of speaks to music making, even, let's say, when a composition is already penned, that the process of bringing it to life is always ever changing. It's never like, oh, that's the way to do it and that's it. I think in my experience, at least, it's been really interesting how, let's say, like the composer himself or herself would rethink and sort of go along with certain ideas, or go and even adapt the piece to different spaces, different venues, different circumstances. That for me is the appeal, of working with living composers. Yeah.
Well, I've spoken to a few composers, and the ones that I spoke to also said the same thing, that sometimes when the music is given to the musician, then it's almost more than they expected it to be, because of how the musician interprets it. And then also, like you say, then going with that and not having thought of it being that way. So isn't it amazing, this cooperation then, or this collaboration then, between musician and composer?
Yeah. It's fascinating, and I think that's really the it's like music making is never static, and in that sense, it's like, music itself, once it is, even if it is composed, it will take a life of its own in a way. Those notes will, there's infinite amount of facets behind what is possible, and I think that just if the relationship between composer and interpreter and all that, I think if it really becomes like if it's something that continues to live, that continues to produce, something new, and let's say something that continues to change and continues to evolve, then that can be really gratifying. Yeah.
Well, a young composer once said to me that he loves the idea that the audience love his music, but for him, what means the most is when the musicians who play the music, when they love playing the music.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's, because in a way to convey a piece of music convincingly, in a way, it's sort of, we have to put, because we act as the conduit, of course, we're the instrumentalist, but at the same time, the music, in many ways, sort of, we have to, our personal experience, our, visions of sound, of color, that becomes our palette. So in a way, I mean, we do have to put ourselves very deep into a piece of music in order to, let's say, understand it and to execute it convincingly. And so in that sense, I think, I could imagine then, because it's like when you go that deep and you really love a piece of music, then I think that really speaks volumes, and makes me want to. I could definitely see myself, like, in the future as being, let's say, part of the path. I mean, of me becoming a composer as well. I think just as a natural continuation of that. Yeah, it feels like a natural continuation, at least at some point. Yeah.
So you have an interest in composing.
For sure. Yeah.
Amazing. But I'm going to ask you now something very strange, probably for you, but I've spoken to a few violinists, and what I never realized was how important the shoes are when you play the violin. Is that true? That you have to feel grounded, or you have to, do you have special shoes that you use when you play?
I've actually never thought about the shoes per se to that
Really?
point, but I do agree with the premise. Like, I do agree with the idea that you do have to be grounded, and you do have to feel as if, like, you do have to feel as if you're an extension. You have roots in the ground, let's say, when you play, because in the end, posture is very important, obviously, and that's very much a part of good posture, I find. I think it helps everything, like, down the chain. If it helps sound production, it helps even the amount of confidence that you have, helps your posture, all of these things. I think that it really becomes like, I think it's important to have good shoes in that sense. I think it's sort of, now that you've made me think about it, maybe I'll sort of, go and invest in my own pair of Goodyear welted, sort of handmade dress shoes, maybe. But like, it's a great idea, actually.
Well,
to be at least to be solid in your stance. Yeah.
One violinist said that if he could have his way, he would go barefoot on stage.
That's also very interesting, because I've never seen violinists go barefoot, but I've seen pianists go barefoot. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Alice Sarah Ott stands out, actually, as one pianist who I saw barefoot, and I can understand, like, the idea behind that, because in a sense it's sort of like, let's say in the pedaling, for example, you feel more direct connection with the resonances of the piano, and in a sense I could imagine when you play barefoot, as sometimes as you do in the practice room, when you're doing at home, it's like that you feel more, again, connected with the ground, in a sense. I could see that for sure. But I guess you'll have to make sure your nails are all in good shape before you go barefoot on stage, though. I mean,
a pedicure before you go.
Exactly. Yeah.
But Kerson, tell me now, what's the wish for you?
What's the wish? Well, I wish to, from a personal point of view, first of all, to continue chasing, let's say, the internal me, I guess, to continue to constantly evolve, to continue to embark on this journey of questioning, as I mentioned before, like just as a way of continuing to develop myself, but also to strip away the layers that that reveal the me that's inside. I find that that's from speaking firstly from a personal point of view, but also like in general, we live in very interesting times, I find, in terms of, and also to ask the question of what the role in which, let's say, classical music or even acoustic instruments play in the future. Also, let's say, within the new generation, because of course we'll all constantly, let's say, have, a renewing cycle of listeners, and, as time goes on. But I think it's just I think it really comes down to it is just to make as much of a positive impact on those around me, through what I do. I think as a musician, that's your power, and also in a way your responsibility to be that kind of a positive impact, let's say, through what you do. Because music, in the end, it's like, regardless of whether it comes from a violin or whether it comes from a piano or from any other instrument, or even from, it's just, it's something there to comfort, to soothe, but also to tell our stories back to ourselves in a way, or to even process what is, what is difficult to process, but in a meaningful and beautiful way, let's say. In my mind, I'm always like thinking back to how important it was, for let's say violin or soloists, let's say, to tour, to play for soldiers during World War II, for example, or in wartime, let's say, when how people in times of let's say even uncertainty, that how music then becomes something that uplifts, that that becomes very essential in that way. It provides hope. It provides all of these things. It provides, sort of a look into the future, somehow. And regardless of whatever, I find that that's the power of music, encapsulated like that. That's and so I feel like just to be able to have that kind of positive influence on as much people as possible, or as, let's say, the people who are around me, I feel like that's already I guess a life well lived, simply put. Yeah,
that's beautiful. But you talk about the music during the war, and I remember that my dad told me that was something in Dresden when Dresden was bombed. And then after, amongst all the ruins, you could actually hear musicians playing days after the bombing. That was the thing that they did, and it's like a way of uplifting and giving hope, and of course this is what it's all about then.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's something that I take quite. I do feel as a responsibility in a way, to just continue to spread good vibes, positive influence. I think that's, I mean, and these days it's also quite interesting how, the abundance of tools that we have. Also, social media is something very, very powerful as well, that can reach a lot of people that are not necessarily in your vicinity.
Absolutely.
But just to put it in a nutshell, like just by staying true to myself, by continuing to, let's say, to evolve and to continue to search deep within myself for what kind of the essence that there is inside, the music that stems within that, or stems from that, for that to continue to reach and to touch people, that for me would be a very noble, I guess, a very noble goal. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Yeah. But did the pandemic make you also rethink things about your music?
Sure. I mean, it sort of, well, it definitely confirmed to me how important music was in the first place, even more than, let's say, before, that you would have that awareness. The fact that, let's say, live music was taken away for a long time, and the fact that even social interaction was taken away for a long time. Like these things, for me, sort of was an affirmation of the power of music or anything that brings people together, because that's a need in the end. It's like it showed me that was a need. But in a sense, it's sort of like it was an opportunity also for me to go deeper as well, internally as well, like within myself. You suddenly, and this is also like a difference which I've also found between playing in a concert hall in a concert versus recording, versus, let's say, being alone in a recording studio.
Oh, yeah.
There's something very interior about that aspect. When you're playing, let's say, in front of a microphone, that the projection, let's say, that you would look for in a concert hall, the projection of whatever it is that you want to project, is reflected more inward. It's more like it becomes more of an introverted, it's the same intensity, it's the same intention as well, but it's just reflected differently. I find it working solo during the pandemic a lot, like and being alone and being confronted with a lot of, let's say, the things that you're confronted with. It's like it's something that caused me to work even more, to get used to working in that way, of just trying to get into the heart of the music, into the heart of myself, with the complete absence of, let's say, even stage dynamics, anything demonstrative, anything to do with show, anything to like these things in a way, because we didn't have concerts that back then, but those things just completely strip away. It's like they're not that important anymore. They've never really been important, not more than, let's say, the being able to, let's say, in your human state, you try and embody the music that you play, and that internal process, I think, was what became very clear during the pandemic, and for music also to be an essential way to process a lot of the difficult emotions that I think we were all feeling during that time, during isolation or during thing. But also, I mean, also in a more sort of like, in a more to do with like the spreading or the sharing of music, then that's also when I really started to ramp up video and let's say also experimenting with how, for example, I mean, I did a few videos where I would overlay myself, or I would play with multiple me's, let's say, and create artificial chamber music that way, just with a microphone and with a video camera. These things also cause you to experiment with possible means of expression in the future as well, like not just to do with also your playing, but also how technology can make things a little interesting, like, and again, like just being able to lay yourself, multiple layers of yourself on each other, and in an artistic sense, but also just broadly in the way that you're able to reach a lot more people than to that social media and that video making becomes a tool in that sense.
Yeah, I think a lot of musicians started experimenting like that, and it's wonderful because now we can see also, and I mean, if it wasn't for social media, I mean, I just not discovered, but I saw you there, and I'm so happy that I got to connect with you there. So it's great that you are on social media.
For sure. Yeah, no, I think it's also, I think it's always a plus when when musicians get more comfortable playing, let's say, in front of a camera or in front of a microphone, because I think the more and more in as you go along in the profession, I think that's just something that's very that's an essential component of what we do as well. But I think like just I think it's a to be active on social media, I mean, can be, as an educational thing, as an interactive thing, can be quite it's a powerful thing, and also it's sort of like, I find that social media, regardless of what you do, it's like an extension of your own personality as well. It kind of shows people who you really,
Exactly.
or certain essential facets of who you are. And I think for me to continue to, like, my attitude when it comes to social media is to, well, in a way, to let what I do speak for itself, in a sense, to do what I would usually do, to, let's say, avoid the temptation of something demonstrative, because of course I think when you're on camera, to an extent, everything becomes rather demonstrative or rather performative. But just to show, to in a way demonstrate, or to paint a picture of, let's say, the inner workings of a musician. Let's say when, for example, you would be working with yourself, or when you would be, in the very honest process of internalizing music. I think that's a very interesting thing to show, and I think that people have really responded to that, because in a way it's again, I think that the music speaks for itself somehow.
Yeah, I think it's important because it brings sort of people an understanding also, because I think if we only see musicians in the concert halls, then there's a bit of a distance, and social media has now broken through that and brought this more closeness. And I think also a lot of people who won't necessarily would have been interested in classical music now get exposed to that more and more on social media, and I think that's also a great thing.
Well, absolutely. I think it's all just more more beauty that's being transmitted, that's more accessible, let's say. I think just all in all, that's it's in a sense, I think that also, it will come back. It will sort of, that effort comes full circle, in a sense that people do become curious and come to the concert hall as a result.
Exactly.
But I think it speaks to the importance of how, for musicians, I find, not just for people to come to them, because I think that's a very natural mindset to come to, because of the fact that how much work you put in practicing and all that stuff, and you go to a concert hall and you feel like, sure. But I think also, like, the importance, especially these days, of musicians going out and bringing music to others.
Yeah.
Doing, like, making the active effort to do that, because as well, we become very much ambassadors of what we do as well. And so whether it's through social media or whether it's through reaching out in one's community, let's say, those immediately around you, I think that musicians these days play that dual role, and I think it's just that's very important today.
But listen, this was so lovely talking to you. Such great insight in what you do and how you do it, and I'm so happy that I could get the opportunity to talk to you. And thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you so much, Petra. It was also a pleasure to talk to you and to meet you. And,
it was really so lovely. And please let me know when you come to Vienna. Do you come? Well, have you been?
I've actually never been to Vienna.
Really?
And so, yeah, I mean, I'm still sort of, I'm still looking forward to the first time I'm going to come, but
Oh, I
perhaps
hope
soon,
that will
perhaps
be
soon.
soon. Can we
Yeah.
put the wish out there?
Yeah, would love to come. Would love to come, of course. Yeah.
That would be great. Please let me know when you're here. I would so love to see you in concert.
For sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
So have a lovely rest of the day. I can
Thank
see
you.
the lovely sunshine at the back of the window there.
Yeah, it's good weather today, so we're lucky.
Okay.
It's good. After a bit of gray. Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, Kerson, have a lovely day.
Yeah, thank you so much,
Hope
Petra.
to see you soon.
Hope to see you soon and great to speak to you again. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.